live event. Today, we are very happy to welcome our guest, Doug Klain, a policy analyst at Razom for Ukraine, humanitarian aid and advocacy organization based in the United States. He also serves as a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council Eurasia Center, if I'm correct, right? A think tank in Washington, D.C. My name is Iryna Shulikina. I'm a chairwoman of Vitsche. And yes, today we are very excited to talk to our friend and fellow expert about crazy event. I don't know how to describe it in other words, which happened in the United States last week. There's Trump-Putin press conference, as well as visit of President Zelenskyy to Washington. How was it? What learnings do we have so far? And what to expect, to be honest, because it's been very confusing, and we still, like here in Europe, in Germany, don't have a clear understanding how what actually we are come up to, and what gonna be. And may I ask you, like, Doug, can you tell us about yourself? How were you busy with it? What have you done during this time? Yeah, how you were how you have been perceiving, and Americans have been perceiving all those negotiations and meetings. Yeah, what's the temperature and mood in US right now?
Absolutely. So, Iryna, thank you so much for having me here. I'm such a huge fan of Vitsche, and it's great to get to join you all and chat with you, and hopefully hear some questions from the viewers and from your audience. So, thank you for introducing me. Yes, I'm with Razom for Ukraine. We're a U.S.-based nonprofit organization providing humanitarian aid in Ukraine, but I'm part of our advocacy team here in Washington, D.C. And while Razom gets aid to Ukraine, our job is to make sure the United States keeps aiding Ukraine. And so I'm happy to share more about Razom during our conversation. But yeah, it's been a big couple of weeks. In the last week in particular, so much has happened. I was actually flying back to Washington D.C. from Germany last Friday as the Alaska meeting was happening between President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And it was a hectic couple of hours. I mean, these kinds of usually it's a summit between world leaders, but I really don't like to call this meeting in Alaska a summit. I think that lends too much gravity and
Yeah.
officialness to Putin that is not warranted. But these kinds of meetings typically take months to prepare, and the White House threw it together in about a week. And there were still some interesting things that Trump did. He buzzed Putin with U.S. military jets, including a B-2 Spirit bomber, the same kind of bomber that was just used in Iran, to very interesting effect there. And one of those was flown right over Putin's head. And I sure do wonder what went through his mind at that moment. He expected it. But more importantly than the theatrics of meetings like that, the substance is what matters quite a lot. And I think there still remain a lot of very serious questions about what was achieved on substance in that meeting, as well as what came out of the summit of European leaders, including Volodymyr Zelenskyy in Washington at the beginning of this week. We still have a lot of questions about these, but I think there's still a lot for us to work through today. The top line that I give for this is, I think, the worst case scenario that many people feared for quite a long time, that Trump and Putin will get into a room and draw lines on a map and decide the future of Ukraine and Europe. I think that situation was probably avoided here. But even so, there are still, I think, pretty profound risks. And there's quite a lot of onus on Europe, Ukraine, and the rest of Europe to try to proactively drive this process and create proposals that the United States can agree to, rather than the traditional path that especially a lot of European leaders have had of waiting for the United States to take the lead, make a proposal, and then figure out what Europe's role is in that. That may not happen here. And if it does happen, it may not be as favorable of a US proposal. But there is flexibility, I think, that we have seen from the United States. Trump is somebody who cares a lot about getting the win, getting the deal, and he doesn't have as much patience for the details. The details are for others to work out. And so if Ukraine and the rest of Europe can figure out the details here and figure it out in a very favorable way, I think there is still flexibility to get a good deal with Trump. And that is where I think a lot of these other issues flow out from. So hopefully that's a good starting point for us. And I know you've got some great questions for this conversation.
There are so many questions. I don't know how. It's first time like I'm talking publicly about Trump, and it's for me very controversial figure, to be honest, because I cannot follow his thought trail. It changes so fast, and we know before the summit, there were a lot of talks, and they still kind of they changed a little bit right now, but the main talk point was that Ukraine has to give up its territories, and it was like really pushed with the Trump rhetorics and pushed through Russian rhetorics. That's the way of bringing peace. Zelenskyy on his side talk about that, like that's how the idea with what Russia come up to show themselves as a winners, because kind of financially, economically, they are not being able to handle the war so successfully anymore as they wanted. Like, what are your thoughts about this notion? Like where we are there, what United States positions so far right now today?
So this is I think one of the most important issues. And first, of course, it's important for us to recognize Russia doesn't just want land. It doesn't just want to take some of Ukraine's land and then go home and end the war. What Russia wants is deeper than that. It's these imperial ambitions. It's this fascism that is unfortunately alive and well in Russia and driving so much of this war. And that even after some kind of a peace deal, the ambitions to keep fighting, to take more, to keep attacking and go further, it's very unlikely that those are going to disappear in Russia anytime soon. And I think that that's important to state at the outset. What we've seen in the United States actually for quite some time is kind of this struggle between some experts and camps that say we should get Ukraine to trade land in exchange for peace. This kind of land for peace formulation is not new. It's been around for a long time, and it's almost always been a bad bet when talking about dictators like Putin. The Second World War, as many point out, really began when Western leaders like British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain tried to give Hitler land in exchange for peace. And we know that dictators like Putin can't be trusted. And actual peace has to be enforced. And they're not going to be happy with just taking something and going home. It always feeds the desire for more. And that's something that I think in Washington, we're trying very hard to make sure that US policymakers understand. And I'm sitting here right now in our office about 3 blocks from Capitol Hill, from Congress, and I am glad to say that the vast majority of our members of Congress here in Washington understand this reality. Unfortunately, not everybody in the White House gets that. And that's an important thing for us to keep pushing for and trying to educate and make sure that, including these members of Congress, are empowered to communicate that and make sure that people understand it. I will say there are some in the White House who do understand this reality. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is somebody who for years has understood who Putin is and what Russia is doing. He has said in the past, actually, it came up on, I think this Sunday, he was doing one of these big news interviews, and they played a clip of him 2 years ago, I want to say, in 2022 or 2023, when he was still a senator. And he had said, you can't make a deal with somebody like Putin. You can't trust him to keep his word. You have to win and enforce a peace. And I think that he does still understand this. And Rubio is trying to operate within the confines of what's possible in this White House. Trump has said, we're going to make a deal. We are going to try to negotiate a peace deal, and that is that. And it's one thing for members of his administration to say that's a bad idea. It's not possible. We have to do something else. Because in some cases, if you really try to fight on these fundamental things, a lot of them find that they are pushed out and they lose the power that they have and they can't try to shape things positively. This is something we've seen throughout Trump administrations, where those who maybe disagree on some of these things, they try to stay within the system. They try to find ways to maintain power and influence with Trump, to shape it positively, to actually get some kind of success here. And so that's one of the things I think we're seeing of, when Marco Rubio in the last week or two has been talking a lot more about security guarantees for Ukraine, which for a big part of this year, Trump has really ruled out. I think we remember in, earlier in the administration, I think it was March or so, when Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth went and met with the Ukraine Defense Contact Group in Brussels. And he said, the United States is not going to let Ukraine into NATO. We're not going to be part of security guarantees for Ukraine. That is something for the Europeans to take care of. And that's kind of the reality we've been operating on for quite some months, until maybe a week ago, when it seems like the door for the United States being involved in security guarantees for Ukraine, maybe that door reopened a bit. And so I think that right now, a really big task is trying to figure out how can we open that door further and make sure that the United States understands that it has a positive role to play in not just guaranteeing Ukraine's security, but guaranteeing that Putin and Russia can't restart this war and reinvade and keep the war going at the first opportunity they get.
Look, you're like, I'm very sorry that I'm like not going through the event chronologically, but it's so like connected to each other that we are kind of jumping from one basically statement to another. I would ask here, like, as soon as you start talking about the security guarantees, Trump recently said it's almost impossible to win the war without striking Russian, he didn't say aggressor's territory. And that's a very kind of surprising statement like this, which is actually showing support to Ukraine. But how do you think Russia react on that? So was it kind of allowance of Ukraine to strike farther in Russian and do what Ukraine doing today? How do you? It's a complicated question, but I hope you understand what I mean.
No, it's a great question. And it's a question where we've seen some variance from Trump. We've seen some differences over time. I remember after our November election last year, this was maybe in December or so, when Joe Biden finally lifted a lot of these range restrictions and targeting restrictions on Ukraine, so that Ukraine could use ATACMS, long-range missiles, to strike into Russia, to strike the targets that it needed to adequately defend its territory. And it was especially at a time when it was trying to use these ATACMS to help Ukraine maintain its foothold in Kursk, as the Russians and their North Korean allies were trying to retake this territory and push Ukraine out. At the time, Trump said, this is a crazy thing that Biden has done. Doesn't he know he's gambling with World War III here? You can't be striking into Russia and poking the bear. And it was all of these things that we've heard the Russians trying to use to, make these threats against the United States, against Ukraine's partners, to deter us from giving Ukraine what it needs to actually succeed. And it was a very unfortunate thing to see Trump turning in that way.
Yeah.
This Truth Social post that Trump just made, that you referenced, that would seem to suggest a shift here. That would seem to suggest that Trump maybe views this a bit differently. I think that I want to see what actually happens. Are there changes in the way that the United States supports Ukraine, the way that the United States enables Ukraine to conduct some of these deep strikes? Or is this just a social media post where nothing really happens after it? And that's entirely possible. But what I would want to wait for is there a real shift here? We have seen over much of this year, even though Trump has not committed to new military assistance for Ukraine, largely he did not stop existing aid As Biden was going out, he had basically set up for weapons to keep being shipped to Ukraine into the Trump administration. And
Okay.
with a couple of very important exceptions, Trump largely did not stop that. He allowed that aid to keep flowing. He just didn't commit to new aid. And one of the things that it seems like has continued in the Trump administration is a lot of this intelligence cooperation.
Hmm.
For some of these deep strikes, especially with certain weapons like ATACMS, Ukraine does work with the United States, with U.S. personnel on some of these technical things, on intelligence. And we have seen the United States cooperate with Ukraine on sharing intelligence, on sharing targeting data to enable Ukraine to better defend itself. And so this is something, and this is where I think it matters quite a lot with that statement from Trump. There's not a lot of other countries that can do this kind of support, this kind of intel support for Ukraine that the United States can do. The US has really
Yeah.
unmatched assets, satellites, and quite a lot else for this kind of intelligence support. And another country can't just jump in and do the same thing for Ukraine if the United States stops that. So when there have been pauses in this intel sharing earlier this year, that was something that really freaked people out in Washington, those who do still support Ukraine. And thankfully, those things were reversed and that intel sharing resumed. But this post from Trump, I hope, would suggest that he understands how important that is and that he's willing to continue supporting Ukraine in this way so it can defend itself.
We will really definitely hope so, but we will be back to the Trump-Putin meeting. But when we are on the weapons, like we have also the question from our viewers right now, like. Yeah, but this deal, you say, which Biden suggests, Biden continue support for Ukraine, you say it ends someday. Do we know the date when it ends? And then Trump says he will be only selling the weapons to Ukraine, right? So there will be no free weapons anymore. At least what he says in his social media. Is it true?
Yeah. It's a very good question, and the answer of is there a date when it ends? There's not like a specific date here. A couple of months ago, there were quite a lot of reports where U.S. experts were trying to figure out, when does a lot of this large-scale U.S. Military assistance for Ukraine left over from Biden, when will that start to end? And it seems like a lot of it has really started to dial down. It is much less now than it was before, and it does seem like we are shifting much more now to what support the United States is giving Ukraine in terms of military assistance. A lot of it is paid for now, and we've seen Europe transferring funds to Ukraine to pay for some of these packages. We've seen the Trump administration approve some
Mm-hmm.
packages already. A couple months ago, there was one on, it was worth about $300 million or so
Mm-hmm.
for parts for F-16 fighters, as well as training and maintenance of other equipment. And these are some of the kinds of packages that we've been seeing more of. But of course, the most important thing, I would say, is air defenses. And we have not yet seen the United States make a really big new commitment of air defenses to Ukraine, especially on Patriots. The United States, what the U.S. provides to Ukraine in terms of Patriots, of approving transfers from other countries, but also providing spare parts for maintenance so that what Ukraine has can stay operational, and the interceptors, the actual ammunition, the missiles that these Patriot launchers fire to intercept Russian missiles. This really does require the United States to cooperate and support Ukraine. And we haven't yet seen a major new U.S. package on that. When Ukraine is coming to the U.S. and talking about a major new deal on
Mm-hmm.
buying weapons, and as we've seen with one of these mechanisms that was made in the last month or so, it's called Pearl, P-U-R-L,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the main way that NATO allies are paying the United States for military assistance for Ukraine. One of the top priorities here is air defenses. And so I think that's something that I'm watching to see. When will there be a major new announcement of Patriots for Ukraine? Because that really does need Trump's sign off. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a top priority for Ukraine.
Thank you very much for this insight. Um, let's come back to Alaska. Let's come back to Alaska. I was following myself like live everything what was happening. That's of course like so many 100,000 people all around the world were following it. It was like a huge event happening, and somehow Trump, who is loving to talk to journalists, didn't give haven't had any proper exchange with journalists. What do you think this silence means?
It's a great question. I mean, Trump loves to talk to the press. He loves to do a press conference whenever he gets the chance. He likes to call in to talk shows all the time. We saw this the day after the Washington summit when Trump in the morning he called in to the Fox News Fox and Friends morning show, and he was just talking to them on the phone for about an hour. He loves to talk to the press, and I think it was notable that in Alaska there was no press conference, even though I think we were expecting one. It was on the
Yeah,
schedule.
yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of reasons why there may not have been a press conference. I think for one, it's entirely possible that Putin just said, I don't want to do it. I don't like talking to the press. I mean, he's a dictator with a lot of state media around him, propagandists. He's not often challenged on his assumptions. He doesn't have to defend himself very often. He gets a lot of information that just confirms his warped reality. And I think that we saw this throughout the Alaska meeting, where American journalists and other foreign journalists were shouting questions at Putin. And there were times where, I mean, he looked a little like taken aback by it. I love to see that. I always love when foreign leaders, especially foreign dictators, have to grapple with like the American press shouting questions in a very rowdy manner at them. I take a lot of pride in that. I love to see dictators have to actually answer questions, or at least hear that people are willing to challenge you and ask hard questions. And so I think it's entirely possible here that Putin just said, hey, twice now here in Alaska, I've had really uncomfortable questions shouted at me. I don't want to have to deal with that. And I think that's entirely possible. Another reason for this might have been that, maybe a lot of specifics really didn't come out of the Alaska meeting, and Trump wasn't ready to answer some of these questions. In the statement that he made after Putin spoke, he talked a lot about how there are some things that we came to a bit of an agreement on, but there's others that we don't agree on, including, and I think he used this phrase, including perhaps the most important thing. And who knows what that most important thing could be. Maybe it has to do with territory, maybe it's NATO, maybe it's security guarantees. We don't
Yeah.
know what that thing is. But I think it's entirely likely that there just wasn't enough for Trump to adequately come out and explain what had happened in that meeting. There wasn't enough that was agreed to, or that they felt comfortable sharing publicly yet. He did say, he wanted to go and immediately talk to Zelenskyy, to other European leaders, and to try to get them on board and bring them into the fold. And so it might be that for Trump, he said, you know what, I'm not going to talk about stuff publicly until I've had a chance to talk with the Europeans about it. And I think that's another likely explanation.
Thank you. We have a question also from the viewer. Um, what they're asking about actually prevailing reaction among American people in US. Like, how do they react to what's happening? What are the moods or polls there in United States on this? On this?
Yeah, I see that question came in from Elizaveta. Elizaveta, that's an excellent question. So, U.S. attitudes on Ukraine, I explain it in kind of two ways. First, in the last couple of months, there have been meaningful shifts, especially among Republicans on Ukraine. Um, that's kind of the first aspect of it. The second aspect is overall, the United States has very consistently supported Ukraine. Americans have very consistently been in favor of support for Ukraine. And we've seen this before this current Trump administration, before the full-scale invasion. For a long time, for all of the partisan fighting that happens in Washington, there's very little that Democrats and Republicans can agree on. For a very long time, Ukraine has been the one thing that is bipartisan, that Democrats and Republicans absolutely agree on. The United States supports Ukraine. And that does still exist. Where some of these issues have come in is the Republican Party, especially, really does take a lot of its cues from Trump. They listen to what is the position that Trump puts out as the leader of the Republican Party. And oftentimes, a lot of public perceptions and opinions for Republicans will shift around based on what they interpret Trump's position as. And so we actually saw this, earlier this year, where especially after that really disastrous Oval Office meeting in February between Zelenskyy and Trump, Republican voters supported Ukraine a bit less, and they had a much more negative view of Zelenskyy. However, in the last month or two, there's been a lot of really interesting public opinion polling done that has shown really like a 180 turn on Ukraine for Republicans. They have very quickly changed what they think about support for Ukraine. The majority of Republican voters now, according to recent polls, think that the United States is not doing enough to support Ukraine, that we should be doing more. The majority of Republicans also think that the United States should support Ukraine, and they view Ukraine more positively than Russia. They view Zelenskyy and Ukrainians more positively than they view Putin. Putin, even among Republicans, is reviled. He's toxic to Republicans. They don't want to see the United States aligning with Russia. And that is a very consistent finding in a lot of public opinion polling. So I think that it's been really interesting in the last 2 months or so, where I think kind of two big factors have been driving this change in Republican public attitudes towards Ukraine. One has been when they really did see more negative actions from the Trump administration, things like cutting aid to Ukraine or pausing it. That actually does inspire a bit of a negative reaction, even among Republican voters. They see these anti-Ukraine actions that happen, and they don't like it. And I think that speaks to something deeper. Even though they do listen to Trump for a lot of their positions, there are still things that they really innately believe. And they reacted negatively to that. They don't want to see the U.S. abandoning Ukraine. And that can be for a lot of reasons. And then second, in the last month or two, it has been a little bit less clear what Trump's position is. We saw a lot of negativity, a lot of bullying and pressure towards Zelenskyy, towards Ukraine earlier in the administration. Lately, it's been a bit more mixed, and we have seen some positive things. And I think that in that ambiguity, a more core support that exists in Americans for Ukraine, even among Republicans, that has had more room to come out. And we have seen that when it's not clear what the party position is, people default to what they tend to believe, and they tend to believe that they should support Ukraine.
Thank you, Doug. That was heartwarming news. What about you mentioned already this disaster meeting in like previous meeting of Zelenskyy and Trump in Washington. How do you think this one, the last one, went actually? It obviously,
it was
yeah, yeah.
the office meeting, and that's part of it's because it was a low bar. I mean that meeting in February, it went wrong in so many ways, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One of which being, I think we really did see, President Trump and JD Vance, Vice President, at times kind of picking a fight, really going in on this and finding reasons to go after Zelenskyy, including the first thing that Trump said to Zelenskyy when he got out of the car arriving at the White House that day back in February. The first thing he said was kind of insulting his dress. You're not wearing a suit.
Yeah,
that was the first thing that Trump said, and of course now infamously that came back in the meeting. But also there were things that maybe the Ukrainian team could have done better. They brought two gifts for Trump, and one of those gifts was excellent. It was the championship boxing belt for Alexander Usyk. Oh man, what a great gift that is for Trump. When you think of the things that Trump loves, that's a pretty good gift. And the second thing was what I think is really important, of course, a book of I believe it was children that have been killed by Russia, and that's something that it's really important for the United States, for the Trump administration, for Trump personally, to understand the reality of what Russia is doing. But apparently, that book was one thing that maybe put Trump on the defensive. That he interpreted that not as I'm trying to educate you and share with you like what Russia is doing to our country, but he maybe interpreted that as putting him on the defensive of, maybe this is your responsibility. I
Mm-hmm.
know you say it's Biden's war, but this is on you. Even when Trump is really trying to position the United States not necessarily as a partner or an ally of
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine, but as this kind of neutral third party that doesn't have a stake in this fight and just wants to see peace come out. And that's a whole other issue that we can certainly talk about. But those were some of the reasons why that meeting maybe went off the rails. This meeting, I'm sorry, I realized that was a bit of a long
No,
answer.
no, it was very interesting. I didn't know that detail
But
actually.
yeah, but to come back to the actual question of how this meeting went, I think it went much better. And President Zelenskyy seemed clearly like very well prepared for this. I think that the Ukrainian team learned a lot of really important lessons from the last one, and there were a lot of factors that really set him up for success here, including coming with something to offer, a deal. And we saw reports on this in the Financial Times, and he talked about it afterwards. Of he proposed to Trump something like a $90 billion weapons deal with the United States, where Ukraine would get financing from Europe and would buy tens of billions of dollars of weapons from the United States, and also do a drone deal with the U.S. And that's something we've seen some interest from Trump and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of interest from others in the United States on. Drones are obviously the future of warfare, and nobody knows drones like Ukrainians do. How can we learn from Ukraine on this? And so I think that coming with that kind of a deal, that was a really smart thing for Ukraine to do. And I hope that we're able to get more details on that, and that maybe there is some progress on that. Because, there's nothing else that Trump wants more than to be able to walk away and say, I got a big deal. I got a
Mm-hmm.
good
Mm-hmm.
deal for the American people. There's a big
Yeah, yeah.
$1 million price tag on it. I got to win. And finding opportunities to give them that kind of a win, that's very useful. And the last thing I'll say was that it was obviously a huge asset that Zelenskyy walked in there flanked by other European leaders, that they were there partly to make sure that there was not a repeat of February, but also I think to really show Trump, look, you have allies here, and your position is stronger when you're working with your allies than when you're trying to go it alone. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
that was a really important thing to communicate there.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the topic that's I didn't know that about the second present, to be honest. Somehow I knew only about the first one. I think a lot of people too. But this point with the kids and deportation of Ukrainian children, it was a point actually on the during the meetings because First Lady have sent the letter to Putin about kids, and recently also we have heard, if I'm not mistaken, for Trump, he also said that not from Trump, from I forgot who exactly from who posted also there was a big news that the 19 more than 19,000 kids were brought to Russia from Ukrainian territory and deported, and they have to bring back. So its topic again started. It started again to be public and actual. Also, Ursula von der Leyen talked about this, and I got a feeling that it's landed somehow in US. So like people start taking it really serious. Also, Trump himself, right?
I absolutely. This is actually, to bring my organization Razom for Ukraine back into this. This has been one of our main advocacy campaigns this year of here in Washington, around the United States, really trying to inform people and create awareness that Russia has abducted tens of thousands of Ukrainian children, and saying, if President Trump wants to go out there and make some kind of a peace deal, well, he has to make sure that the kids come home. He has to make sure that Ukraine isn't forced to surrender its future, literally, to Russia, as these more than 19,000 Ukrainian children are abducted by Russia, Russified, forced to speak Russian, brainwashed, and raised really to fight against their own country. It's something that a lot of Americans aren't well educated on. And so we've done a lot of advocacy trying to inform people. We even made a website, releasethekids.com, and you can go to it now, Release the Kids. And
Amazing.
created a lot of assets there. You know, we actually ran an advertisement on Fox News to try to make sure that President Trump saw it himself, informing about this issue and saying, you know, you, President Trump, can make a difference here. You need to push Putin to free the kids. We also placed advertisements in other outlets that, by chance, President Trump reads, like the New York Post, but also created tools that Americans can use to reach out to their members of Congress, to reach out to the White House directly, and tell them, look, I care about this issue. I want you to understand what Russia is doing, and I want you, as my representative, as my president, to push for saving these children and make sure that they aren't left behind. And so we've done a lot of advocacy on this, you know, there's a lot of people doing really important work on it. And so I don't want to make it sound like we're the only ones here. There's other excellent organizations, especially Save Ukraine, which is actually going, you know, it's a Ukrainian NGO, and they are actually saving kids and getting them out of Russia back to Ukraine. And we've had the opportunity to get to, you know, meet some of the folks at Save Ukraine and, you know, work with them when they visit Washington, D.C. You know, the head of Save Ukraine, Mykola Kuleba, he visits Washington, D.C. quite a lot. He's a very impactful and powerful voice. And, you know, one time earlier this summer when we knew that he was coming to Washington and he was bringing actually a young Ukrainian boy who they had gotten out of Russia, as well as his mother. And we heard they were coming to Washington, and we said, oh, I want people to hear from you. And so we took them around in Congress, and members of Congress met with them. They heard firsthand what it's like to be a Ukrainian kid who has been taken by the Russians and come back. And it's incredibly powerful. And there's actually legislation in Congress right now. There's a resolution which is, you know, like a statement, an important statement from Congress. But there's also a bill, an actual you know, legislation with money behind it, on this issue. And at the time, you know, when Kuleba was here and you know, we were doing some of these meetings, I remember, you know, there were two U.S. senators who met with these folks, and on the spot said, "There's a resolution about this condemning the abduction and calling for their return. I want to sign on right now. I want to immediately co-sponsor it." I mean, that really showed how powerful it is to hear from Ukrainians, to hear firsthand, and also to pair those powerful stories with a clear action that can be taken. And in this case, it was that they could co-sponsor the resolution, add their name onto it. And we've only seen more momentum, I think, in recent months grow behind these pieces of legislation in Congress. In the last couple of weeks, there's a new version of it in the House of Representatives here, and that has gained more co-sponsors as well. And so it's an issue that really is getting more attention in the United States. And in polling, actually, that Razom has done on this, we found that it's one of the most convincing arguments for getting Republicans to support aid to Ukraine. You know, we asked a lot of Republicans in polling earlier this year. We would share different statements, you know, inform you of a different aspect of Russia's war, and ask then afterwards, are you more likely to support U.S. assistance to Ukraine, to support weapons to Ukraine? And after being informed that Russia has abducted these children and what they're doing to them, I think it was 73% of Republicans were more likely to support sending aid to Ukraine. And that was, it was the most convincing thing that generated more support. And I think that's a really important lesson of figuring out what is it that speaks to people, that gets them to understand this war in a different way, challenges some of the assumptions they maybe have, and then how can you get people that kind of effective information and provide them an outlet? What can they
Yeah.
do about it? How can they solve it?
Thank you so much for your great job, and yeah, for pushing such an important topic there. I hope, yeah, I wish you like I wish you success for that, and I hope it will go further. I hope we still have a moment for two more questions because, yeah, I understand the time is running out. There is a question actually about we're still coming back like to Putin, and then I would like to talk like one question also about European influence on all the situation. So our viewers asking what kind of pressure, political, social, media driven, or stemming from Putin's action do you think most likely to influence U.S. decision maker? Like what what actually U.S. is afraid of from Russia?
It's a really good question. And this is where, we kind of come to some of the oddities of the American system right now and the difficulties. Where, like I talked about, the majority of Americans want to help Ukraine. The majority of Congress wants to help Ukraine. And if there was legislation that came up for a vote in Congress right now to send more weapons, to sanction Russia, if it came up for a vote, it would pass. Absolutely. Um, but a lot depends on the President of the United States. A lot depends on what Trump wants, what he thinks, and that's where we have a lot of the difficulties. He doesn't view the US as an ally of Ukraine. He doesn't view the US as this partner with an obligation to help Ukraine. Talking to him about the Budapest Memorandum, about our assurances of Ukrainian sovereignty and territory back in 1994, he hears that and he says, "That's 1994. I wasn't president then. I didn't have anything to do with that." Um, and for him, like I said, I think he sees the United States more as this neutral third party that just wants to stop the killing, as he says, to get a peace deal, to get this over with. Um, and he came into office really thinking, I can use my personal relationship with Putin and just sit down, get a deal. We can just get this done. He's a rational guy. He's a businessman. And these are assumptions that Trump had that I think aren't panning out. Where we have seen success in trying to, see if Trump understands the reality of this, of what the real barriers are to peace, Putin and Russia and their ambitions that haven't changed. It's been when his expectations don't align with reality. He talked, a month and a half ago or so during this meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte about how he would get off the phone with Putin and think, this is great. We're going to have a ceasefire. It's working out so well. And then he would go and talk to his wife, Melania, and she would say, there was just another bombing and the Russians just attacked Ukraine again. And that doesn't align with his expectations. And so I think that from my perspective, it's a really important thing to keep underlining that Ukraine is not the obstacle to peace. Zelenskyy is not the obstacle to peace here. Nobody wants peace more than Ukrainians. It's the Russians that are the obstacle. Highlighting that where Ukraine says yes to basically everything, yes, we'll go meet with Putin. Yes, we can agree to some kind of a ceasefire. Yeah, like Ukraine keeps saying yes, and Russia keeps saying no. And that's such an important thing that I think we have to keep driving home. Because we saw in Alaska where Putin and the Russians seemed to give like the slightest yes. Maybe we'd be open to this. And because Trump has this bias of working directly with Putin, of thinking that they can just use their personal relationship, he takes the smallest potential win and runs with it and sees it as something that really resets expectations. And the onus goes back onto Ukraine. I think it's really important to keep underlining, like just today, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, he had an interview with an American outlet, I think it was NBC News, and he said again, we're not going to do a meeting with Putin and Zelenskyy until the agenda is set, whatever that means. They keep finding excuses to say no. They keep rejecting the ideas of a ceasefire. They keep rejecting the idea of Ukraine actually getting security guarantees. They've revived one of these asks that they had in the Istanbul talks in 2022, where if Ukraine is going to get a security guarantee, Russia gets a veto over whether or not Ukraine's security can be guaranteed. It's like Russia gets a veto over whether somebody can help Ukraine if Russia invades again. It's one of the most ludicrous ideas out there. And that's an idea, that's a position of the Russians that is really important for us to keep highlighting, to keep underlining the fact that Ukraine says yes, Ukraine is not the obstacle to peace, it's the Russians. The Russians are the ones that want to find any excuse to keep fighting, keep dominating, and keep this war going to achieve what they want, which is the domination of Ukraine.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Like one of the last questions, I would like to ask you, like, what's your perspective on Europe? What Europe can do to persuade US to help more and to get US not as a neutral stay there, but an ally. And how do you perceive European action in that matter?
Yeah.
And in the end, I'll ask you to tell more what campaigns Razom have right now. Maybe people can support somehow or pay attention to it. It would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, as for the Europeans, actually, I wrote an article on this in, I think it was January of this year. I wrote it for the Atlantic Council, essentially outlining at that time, the Trump administration was coming into office. They didn't have a clear policy on Ukraine. They knew they wanted to end the war somehow, but they didn't know how. And it was an opportunity for Ukraine and the rest of Europe to put forward proactively recommendations to say, this is how we can achieve what you want. This is what we need from you. And here's what we're willing to do about it. And I think the situation hasn't changed that much since then. Trump still wants to move forward, and when there are proactive suggestions from Europe, we could provide security guarantees to Ukraine. The British have said that they're ready to send troops to enforce an end to the war, a ceasefire. We just need X, Y, and Z from the United States. We need enablers like intelligence support and logistics support, things that Europe can't do as well as the United States. That, I think, is still the key thing that we need from Europe. It's more than anything else, political will. It's the will to say, we will actually lead here. We will come up with a plan of action and we will take responsibility for it. We will lead on it and we will ask the United States to support us in doing that. The Trump administration doesn't want to lead on security in Europe. It doesn't want to lead on Ukraine. It wants it to not be its problem anymore. And the best way to try to still get something is by saying, okay, I accept that premise. Here's what I need from you to make that happen, to empower those in the Trump administration who want to see Ukraine succeed, who want to see Europe actually stay secure. It empowers them to make the argument of, we've got a solution here. It just requires us to take these kinds of actions. So I think that that's an important way that Europe can still try to lead on this. And it's difficult for a lot of historical reasons, and also because it's a real reversal of the U.S.-European relationship, of the transatlantic relationship, where the U.S. has been the guarantor of security, the provider, and Europe has followed and listened. And now it's being asked on a very short timetable to reverse that, to reverse decades of how Europe's security has worked. And I think that's going to be the make or break question. Europe is already, I would say, reliant on Ukraine for its security in a way that it is not on the United States. Ukraine's security and success is directly correlated to the security of the rest of Europe. And I think we need to see much more action from Europe to recognize that.
Thank you very much. Tell us 2 words about campaigns, what you're running. We have heard about Bring Back Kids campaign. What else? What else are you up to these days in Razom?
Yeah, there's another campaign actually that I think is great to share. We've kind of been calling it the Ukrainians are winners campaign. And yes, we have a website for it. It's you can go to www.ukrainians.win. And the idea behind this kind of messaging campaign is recognizing the reality now. At the beginning of this full-scale invasion, Ukraine was asking for help, asking for the tools to defend itself, and was a recipient of aid. And that's changing. There are still things, obviously, that Ukraine needs, like air defenses, like Patriots, like intelligence support. But the Ukrainian government is talking about how it's producing the majority of its daily combat needs in Ukraine. Ukrainians have figured out what does modern warfare look like and how can they meet the needs of it. They are learning things that nobody else in the world has seen before. And Ukraine has a lot to offer. Ukraine has lessons to share with the world. And as an American, I want the United States to learn from Ukraine. I want us to learn the lessons that Ukraine has to share because that'll make us more secure and make us stronger. And at the same time, we can support Ukraine and make sure that Ukraine stays secure, which also is in America's interest. Razom ourselves, it's been fascinating for me learning from my colleagues in Ukraine. I mentioned that the majority of what Razom does is aid in Ukraine. We have over 100 staff there, and they are helping to pioneer in tactical medicine and battlefield medicine. When I was last, visiting our team there this summer, they were breaking down some of the first aid kits that we create, and a tactical medicine backpack that you open it up and you bring out some of these, really fascinating bits of new kinds of medical tools. One of which, it's a little bit graphic. I hope you don't mind. But when somebody does suffer a wound from an FPV drone, especially if it hits your face, there can be really catastrophic damage, and especially it can leave open wounds. And there was a really fascinating piece of tactical medicine of this tool that effectively, if you've been wounded by an FPV drone on the front line, normally that wound could be fatal. And this tool, effectively, it seals your face up, it seals the wound, keeps everything in place, and allows you to breathe still when that might otherwise be complicated. And that's just enough to get somebody off the front line, get them back to stabilize them, and then save their life. And that is a wound that has never before been seen in human history. And Ukrainians are figuring out how to save that life. And as an American, I want Americans to understand how to do that and to learn that lesson, because it's really important for all of us. So it made me incredibly proud to be part of our organization and to see what my colleagues are doing in Ukraine. And it's these kinds of wins, these kinds of lessons that I want us sharing, because it underlines why it's in our interest for the United States and for every other country not to sit on the sidelines, not to act like you're a neutral third party, but to see that it's worth being Ukraine's ally, because Ukraine has a lot to offer, and we shouldn't miss out on that. We should work together because we're a lot stronger when we're together.
Dear Doug, thank you so much for this insightful conversation. Thank you so much, Razom, for your work in Ukraine, in the United States. You're very welcome to pass by when you're in Berlin. We'll be very happy to see you live. And may the force be with you, and continue doing your incredible work, Father, in the name of Ukraine and peace and justice in this world. Thank you so much for everything, and Slava Ukraini.
Heroyam Slava, thank you so much for having me, and you're always welcome in Washington. I hope we get to see each other sometime soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a nice evening. Bye.
You too. Bye.